Venezuelan authorities have presented new evidence related to Operation Gideon. Chilean health workers have protested to demand improvements in public hospitals in the midst of the health crisis. Scientific models drawn up in South Africa have shown that the country could see up to 50,000 COVID-19 deaths and as many as 3 million cases by the end of the year. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan Vice President of Communications Jorge Rodriguez presented new evidence related to Operation Gideon. The new evidence directly links the criminal Colombian gang, Los Panchencas, to the armed incursion into Venezuela. According to Rodriguez, Venezuela has reported operations in mercenary camps operated by the gang in areas it controls along the north coast of Colombia, including Barranquilla, Riohacha and La Guajira. In all these spots, activities have developed related to the attacks on Venezuela.
Esos audios también nos han llegado no solamente por filtraciones.
All these audios have also reached us, not only through infiltrations, but also through the indignant voices of the Colombian armed forces that know these barbaric allegiances between these deserters, these traitors, who are armed and trained in regions of northern Colombia and linked to Colombian drug trafficking, the drug trafficking that the Colombian government supposedly fights, the drug trafficking that the DEA supposedly claims to combat, and all of the operations that Donald Trump has announced against drug trafficking. It seems not only that they have not had any positive effect in the fight against drugs, but on the contrary, what they have done is strengthen the powerful drugs trafficking clans that exist in northern Colombia.
And faced with new evidence implicating the Colombian government in Operation Gideon, Colombian Defense Minister Carlos Gómez Trujillo referred to the leaking of information to Venezuela.
Se intensificarán los mecanismos dentro de la fuerza pública.
The mechanisms within the security forces will be intensified to identify any possible action by public servants or uniformed personnel who may be related to dictatorial regimes in the region, putting the Colombian national sovereignty or constitutional order at risk.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro announced the strengthening of curfew and quarantine measures in border states of Colombia after 36 imported cases of COVID-19 were confirmed.
We are making decisions to reinforce the border, to create quarantine capabilities at the border. All those decisions have already been made and are being executed. Curfews in the border crossing municipalities are being enforced. 14-day quarantine for all those who enter there. And then, when this quarantine is over, they arrive with their PCR tests to their state, for example, Aragua, Anzoátegui, Monagas, Caracas, La Guaira, and they are submitted to a new quarantine.
Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez reported this Thursday that 58 new coronavirus cases had been confirmed in the country. Of the new cases, 22 were locally transmitted and 36 were imported cases, mostly from Colombia. The Vice President complained that due to a lack of controls by Colombian border authorities, Venezuelan migrants are returning to the country without undergoing the necessary protocols to prevent the spread of the virus. She noted that the Presidential Commission held a meeting with the United Nations system and the Pan American Health Organization to ask them to call on Colombian migratory authorities to control the situation in border states. Chilean health workers have protested to demand improvements in public hospitals in the midst of the health crisis. Groups of health specialists from the metropolitan area gathered outside the Sotero del Rio hospital in the capital, Santiago, to denounce the current situation of the public health system, which they described as collapsed. They also demanded protective equipment to fight the COVID-19 epidemic. Chile has now reported over 57,000 COVID-19 cases and nearly 600 fatalities. Brazil has recorded its deadliest day since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, with 1,188 COVID-19 deaths reported in the last 24 hours. The death toll in Brazil has now reached over 20,000, while the country has reported the third highest number of coronavirus cases in the world at over 310,000. In this context, the Brazilian Chamber of Deputies received a new request from over 400 civil society organisations and political parties this Thursday to initiate impeachment proceedings against President Jair Bolsonaro, citing his mishandling of the coronavirus outbreak and the weakening of the public health system. Mexico reported a new daily record of COVID-19 deaths this Thursday at 424. The COVID-19 death toll in Mexico has now reached 6,090. Meanwhile, Director General of Epidemiology at the Mexican Ministry of Health, José Luis Alomía, indicated that test results are pending to determine the cause of 726 suspicious deaths. Health authorities also reported 2,248 new coronavirus cases on Thursday, making for a total of over 56,000. The Cuban embassy in Washington announced that charter flights have been organised to facilitate the return of Cuban citizens stranded in the United States amid the coronavirus pandemic. This Friday will see 2 flights operated by World Atlantic Airlines from Florida to Havana. According to a statement, the flights are the result of coordination between the US and Cuban authorities and will allow the return to Cuba of hundreds of nationals who usually reside in the island and requested help to return through the Cuban consulate. On arrival in Cuba, all passengers will be transferred to isolation centres where they must remain in preventative quarantine for 14 days. On Wednesday, China delivered an important donation of medical supplies and financial resources to assist Cuba's battle against the novel coronavirus. During a ceremony at the Cuban Health Ministry, Chinese ambassador to Havana, Chen Shi, noted that the recent address by Chinese President Xi Jinping during the 73rd session of the World Health Assembly offered important guidelines for the future fight against the pandemic. Ambassador Chen delivered the materials and funds donated by the Chinese Red Cross to the Cuban authorities, including COVID-19 test kits, face masks and surgical gloves, among other personal protective equipment.
This year marks the 60th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and Cuba. In the midst of the growing uncertainties and an ever-changing world, the importance of the traditional and fraternal friendship that unites us has been further highlighted. We will continue to support the efforts of the Cuban people in the fight against COVID-19, and we are ready to work together to promote exchanges and cooperation in various sectors. We are convinced that Cuba will overcome this epidemic and continue with firm steps in the construction of socialism. China has been an example of how to act in an area as complex as the epidemic, contributing experiences, providing resources, and sharing its experiences as the first country that was subjected to the epidemic. We followed the statements of the Chinese president, we support them, and we know that they will be a faithful reflection of what China represents for the world in this great battle.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has announced new measures to ease COVID-19 lockdown restrictions starting May 28th. Scottish residents will now be allowed to conduct outdoor activities such as sports and travel within their local area, while schools will reopen in August. The First Minister highlighted that the measures are a cautious set of steps aimed at improving people's well-being, restarting the economy and restoring normality and safety. Scotland had registered more than 14,000 coronavirus cases and a death toll of over 2,000. Meanwhile, overall numbers for the United Kingdom stand at more than 250,000 cases and over 36,000 deaths, although various reports have noted that the official figures fall far short of the reality. The Italian government has announced that all airports will be reopened from June 3rd. The announcement was made by the Italian Minister of Infrastructure and Transport on Wednesday. The measure seeks to reinforce the plan launched by the Italian authorities to boost the country's tourism industry and economy. Italy has started easing its lockdown restrictions, but the government has warned that social gatherings and parties could favour a new outbreak of the coronavirus. Italy has more than 60,000 active cases, while its death toll stands at more than 32,000. Russian authorities reported more than 8,000 new COVID-19 cases this Thursday. Russia has now reported a total of over 317,000 novel coronavirus cases, representing the second highest number in the world. Its COVID-19 death toll stands at more than 3,000. Moscow is the epicenter of the outbreak, with the vast majority of cases. Meanwhile, more than 7 million tests have been conducted across the country, and over 92,000 people have recovered from the virus. US President Donald Trump is considering hosting an in-person G7 meeting in June, despite the high prevalence of active COVID-19 cases in the United States. The summit scheduled for June was cancelled in March and was to be replaced with a video conference due to the novel coronavirus pandemic. However, Trump posted on Twitter on Wednesday that he was considering a face-to-face meeting of G7 members in Washington, D.C., adding that it would be a symbol of the United States and other countries seeking to return to normal. The US has reported the highest number of COVID-19 cases and deaths in the world, with over 1.1 million cases still active. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has stated that the state of emergency in Tokyo and its surrounding regions could be lifted as early as next week if the number of new coronavirus cases continues to fall.
Their evaluation, and if the current situation continues, I believe a lifting of the state of emergency may be possible.
China began its most important political event of the year on Thursday after a 2-month delay because of the coronavirus pandemic. The annual session of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference was inaugurated at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing by Chairman Wang Yang, who presented a report on the activities of the political advisory body. President Xi Jinping and other top political leaders attended the meeting and held 1 minute's silence in tribute to the martyrs who died fighting COVID-19 and all compatriots who've lost their lives to the disease. The chairman delivered a work report to the political advisors who have gathered to discuss major domestic political, economic and social issues and make proposals.
The CPPCC should organize special and political consultation-based standing committee meetings focusing on securing a solid victory over the battle against poverty, establishing a long-term mechanism to address relative poverty, provide consultations and advice on the compilation of the 14th five-year plan, which aims to advance national economic and social development, and carry out themed consultation to facilitate innovative cooperation in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area and promote the cultural progress while implementing the rural revitalization strategy.
And China's National Health Commission reported 2 new coronavirus cases this Thursday. One of the 2 new cases was identified in Guangdong province and was imported, while the other was locally transmitted in Shanghai. According to the Commission, a total number of over 1,700 imported cases have been reported since the outbreak of the pandemic, with only 43 remaining in hospitals. In total, China has reported more than 82,000 novel coronavirus cases, over 4,000 deaths, and more than 78,000 recoveries. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Scientific models drawn up in South Africa have shown that the country could see up to 50,000 COVID-19 deaths and as many as 3 million cases by the end of the year. The models, which considered best and worst case scenarios, indicated that the southern hemisphere winter would lead to a higher rate of infection, resulting in as many as 3 million possible cases by November, while demand for hospital beds is seen peaking at 45,000, around 10 times the current intensive care bed availability. South Africa has already reported the highest number of cases on the continent at over 19,000. One of the models showed the lockdown had reduced the rate of infection by 60%, and that since the beginning of May, when lockdown restrictions were eased, that had fallen to 30%. According to the Africa Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, the COVID-19 death toll across the continent has reached 3,000. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Africa has surpassed 90,000, of which more than 38,000 patients have recovered from the virus. In terms of the number of fatalities, North Africa has the highest figures, with Egypt reporting almost 700 deaths and Algeria over 500. South Africa has reported the highest number of cases in the continent at more than 19,000. Namibia, Seychelles, Eritrea, Mauritius and Tanzania have not reported any new confirmed COVID-19 cases in more than 10 days. The Nigeria Centre for Disease Control on Wednesday announced 284 new cases of COVID-19 in the country, bringing the total to over 6,600. The centre also reported 8 new COVID-19 fatalities, bringing the death toll to 202. The health agency explained that most of the patients who have died from COVID-19 had other underlying conditions. The latest cases were confirmed across 13 states of the country. Nigeria is the 5th worst hit nation in the continent and the most affected in West Africa. The head of Burundi's Electoral Commission appealed for patience on Thursday as ballots were collected and tallied following the presidential election. Voting in Burundi's presidential election on Wednesday ended in calm, despite opposition accusations of fraud. The previous election in 2015 sparked violence that left over 1,000 people dead and saw thousands more flee the country. A total of 7 candidates are vying to replace long-serving President Pierre Nkurunziza. The opposition has denounced electoral fraud, alleging that electoral observers were chased away from polling stations, but the government has denied the accusations.
We hope that in all the polling stations there were observers and that they observed well, and we hope that the results that will be communicated to us on the radio will be acceptable. Where I was, I can say that I didn't notice anything abnormal. Everything went well. Only small problems were observed, and there were security guards to take care of them.
Iran dismissed new US sanctions on several Iranian officials, saying they were a sign of the complete inefficiency of Washington's previous sanctions on the Islamic Republic. The new sanctions were imposed on the Iranian Interior Minister and various commanders of the law enforcement forces. Foreign Ministry spokesman Sayed Abbas Mousavi stressed on Thursday that US sanctions were fruitless and repetitive and a sign of weakness, despair and confusion of the US administration. Meanwhile, spokesman of the Guardian Council, Abbas Ali Khadjodai, expressed in a tweet on Wednesday that such sanctions cannot affect the firm will of the Iranian people to fight against hostile US policy. Tensions between Washington and Iran have escalated since the US government unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 and embarked on a campaign to economically strangle Tehran. The Arab League has condemned the Israeli plan to annex parts of the West Bank, describing the initiative as a new war crime against the Palestinian people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said cabinet discussions will begin on July 1st regarding extending Israeli sovereignty to Jewish settlements in the West Bank and the annexation of the Jordan Valley. Meanwhile, Palestinians have expressed outrage at Israel's plans to seize further Palestinian land and stressed that any such moves will make peace impossible. Arab League foreign ministers condemned the move during an emergency meeting on the coronavirus pandemic. And Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh stated that the annexation would destroy any chances of a two-state solution sought by Palestinians and supported by the majority of the international community.
We are going to be committed to reaching a peaceful solution for a two-state solution, which does enjoy a Palestinian national consensus, it does enjoy a regional consensus, and it does enjoy an international consensus. Israel, by threatening or by announcing this annexation, Israel does violate international law, and Israel does violate all agreements that has been signed with us, whether it is political agreement, economic agreement, security agreement, legal agreement, all agreements that we signed with Israel has been violated consistently in a systematic way. And this annexation has to do with the destruction of a future possibility of a Palestinian state.
And in honour of Africa Day next week, we finish this news brief with a music video by multi-award-winning South African star Master KG, featuring singer-songwriter Nomsibo Sikodi, offering a taste of modern African musical culture. Remember, you can get all the latest news on our website and social media. For Telesura English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.
Jerusalem, ikhaya lami, ilondoloze, uhambe nami, zungangishilana. Jerusalem, ikhaya lami, ilondoloze, uhambe nami, zungangishilana. Dawo yami ayikholana, buso wami awukholana. wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami ilondoloze 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 zungangishilana ilondoloze 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 zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze